Greetings, brethren. Welcome to the seventh day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which also is a weekly Sabbath. Now we know the command from God that we are to bring an offering on the holy days, and we have the command right here in Leviticus 23. And of course, this is very interesting, isn't it? One of the main keys to understanding what God is doing in the world, an important one to help unlock the timing of the fulfilling of the prophecies, is all found in Leviticus 23, which then is the sequence of the holy days themselves, and the sequence of them. Let's pick it up here beginning in verse 6. On the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Lord. Interesting. You must eat unleavened bread. Now, God has us eat the unleavened bread for 7 days, and tonight after sundown, you can have leavened bread. But why is it that he commands us to eat unleavened bread all 7 days? So that we learn the lesson that sinful human nature cannot accomplish of itself any spiritual good that will last forever. So God's plan is to change us and convert us by relying on Him, by trusting in Him, by looking to Jesus Christ as our sacrifice. On the first day you shall have holy convocation. You shall not do any work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord 7 days. And in the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. And we know that the importance of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it's really very interesting. When those who have been in the church but left, and then end up not keeping the Sabbath the way they should if they keep it, and not keeping the feast of God, and if you don't keep the Passover the way that Jesus has said, at the time he has said, then you have no life in you. And what happens then? They're left to leading their lives by human good. And human good can be spiritual leaven. And in fact, without the Holy Spirit, it is spiritual leaven. Now, God tells us here in 2 Corinthians 9, so let's turn there. And this is very interesting too. How do we lead our lives, and how do we live our lives, and how do we look to God? What do we do? And so forth. Now then, here's a profound principle. Verse 6. It's like sowing. Now, you know the parable of the sower. Some of the seed fell on the good ground, some fell on the rock, some fell on the shallow soil, some fell in the thorns and thistles. But only the good ground brought forth fruit. And he said, some produced 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. So here's the principle we find in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 6. 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 6. But this I say, the one who sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. Each one as he purposes in his heart. In other words, it's between you and God. And that's why we don't beg for money. We don't send out letters of solicitation. Send money. We always operate on the budget that God sends. And God always provides, and he will provide for you. And it just works that way. As he proposes in his heart, but not grudgingly, nor by compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now notice this. In keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread and all the feast of God, and staying close to God in prayer and study and growing and overcoming, and keeping our eyes on the goal. Here's what God will do. Verse 8. For God is able, that means has the power, to make all grace abound toward us, so that in every way you may always have sufficiency in all things, and may abound unto every good work. And so that's what it all leads to. So at this time, we'll take a pause, and we'll take up the offering. Thank you very much, brethren, for the offerings that you provide. We always use them to serve the brethren, to preach the gospel, to publish the gospel, and to help as many people as we can. So we thank you very much for it. Now today is a very good day with many, many lessons to learn. And those many, many lessons have to do with our relationship with God, and have to do with how we need to trust God in everything that we do. And we know we're to trust God with all our hearts. Well, the lessons that we learn are the lessons from the children of Israel, because they went out from Ramses with a high hand, loaded down with wealth and clothing and all the spoil that they could possibly take. And Moses had them all organized in a marching order, and they left Ramses. And that was the day after the Passover. So let's look at that here in Numbers 33. Let's see what that tells us. So this also tells us that the Passover and unleavened bread are separate days, contrary to what some people think. Okay? Numbers 33, verse 1. These are the journeys of the children of Israel who went forth from the land of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by command of the Lord. So what we read here is by command of the Lord. Okay? These are the journeyings according to their starting places. For they set out from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. We already saw that. On the next day after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were still burying their firstborn, whom the Lord had stricken among them. the Lord also executed judgments upon their gods. Remember, that's what he said that the Passover was for. Okay? So then, they took their journeyings, they went to Sukkoth, and then they went to Ethan on the edge of the wilderness. And then they went from there down to Baal Zevon, and they pitched it in front of Migdal. Okay. Now then, what happened at Baal Zevon? Well, let's come back here to Exodus 14. And here is the lesson. Regardless if circumstances get difficult, you got to trust God. And many times, like he did here with the children of Israel, he led them not the easy way to the Holy Land, but they came down to the western shore of the Red Sea. And along the Red Sea there's a nice little plateau, but the mountains rise sharply right after that. And marching in a column, they couldn't be in a big group like they later were when they had set up the tabernacle and everything. When they set up the tabernacle, they had it right in the middle, and then they had 4 tribes on the east, 4 tribes on the north, 4 tribes on the west, and 4 tribes on the south. Here, they were in their marching column because they couldn't gather together in any other order. And this was on the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So they came there. Of course, that's a Sabbath. So they came there and they were settled down the evening before. Well, Pharaoh had a change of heart. Let's read it. Verse 3, Exodus 14. Now remember, Pharaoh's a type of Satan the devil. And Satan the devil always likes to work circumstances to come after us if he can. And we're told in Ephesians, the 6th chapter, that we're to have the full armor to protect us from Satan. And we will see something else that is greater when we go through this in Exodus 14. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are trapped in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he will follow them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, so that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. So they did. Now, verse 5. And the king of Egypt was told that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. He took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. Oh, they were happy. Oh, they were glad. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army. And they overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-Hiroth and before Baal Zevon. Now notice how quickly the carnal mind changes. When everything is going good, Oh, we're so happy for God. But when things get tough, like it is here, we're going to learn some lessons. We're going to see that regardless of what happens, regardless of the circumstances, God is with you, God is in you, and God is for you. Now, the children of Israel didn't realize this because they were not converted. So here's what happened. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were afraid. Now stop and think for a minute. How many of the plagues took place in Egypt to get to the point of Pharaoh letting them go? And the final plague was what? The death of the firstborn of animals and beasts, right? And the firstborn of all the children, right? And so they saw all the plagues, and the last ones never came near them in the land of Goshen. So here comes Pharaoh. Now, what should they have done at that point? They should have gone to Moses and say, Moses, help us all to trust in God. We'll all get on our knees here and pray and ask for God's intervention, and you pray to God. Because we remember all the plagues that were done in Egypt, and God has the power to turn back the armies of Pharaoh. No, they didn't do that. They did cry out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, have you taken us away to die in this wilderness because there were no graves in Egypt? Now think about that. What do you do when you find that there is something that God has asked you to do, or circumstances that come upon you that you don't know how to handle? Do you complain to God, or do you pray? Do you accuse God or ask for mercy? Okay. So they said, verse 11, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness because there were no graves in Egypt? In other words, we're just going to die out here in the wilderness and no place to bury us. Why have you, notice, accused Moses, dealt this way with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Now here's another thing, another lesson. Never look at the immediate short term. Look at the overall goal. Then we can have perspective when we do that. Okay? Now notice, before God started to bring them out of the slavery of the Egyptians, they were crying, they were moaning, oh God, help us, we are oppressed by the Egyptians, we have to serve them day and night. Okay? Now notice how human nature is. Turn it clear around. Instead of praising God for deliverance, here's what they said. Here's what they told Moses. Did we not tell you this word in Egypt, saying, let us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. See? Now then, we need to always look at things God's way. So notice what Moses said. What could he do himself? He had to trust in God. He had to believe God. So this is something for all the elders and ministers to know. You must always trust God in all circumstances. Even when they are totally bleak, and it looks like a dead-end road has closed in on you. Don't look for an excuse to not follow God or not teach the truth. Let's see what Moses said. Moses said to the people, "Fear not." The first thing, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. And he did. We'll see that in just a minute. Now, as we read these things, I want you to think about all the things in your life that you have gone through, that God has delivered you and has rescued you and has helped you and has blessed you and has given you life and longevity and everything that God can give you. Okay? Now continuing, for the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall never see them again. Now, verse 14, this is the important thing. See? The Lord shall fight for you. We are those that God has called. He will fight for us. But we've got to trust in the Lord. We've got to yield to him. We've got to stay with the scriptures. We can't then start looking to our own carnal ways to try and solve the problem that we are in. Yes, we are to do what we are to do with God's blessings, but we can't do the things that only God can do. And so that's why God brought them into this place, so they would have to trust God completely. And he wanted to show his final great miracle in dealing with the Egyptians and getting them out of slavery. Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. Now, question, how could they go forward when they're right up against the Red Sea and Pharaoh and his armies were right behind us? So he said to Moses, lift up your rod and stretch it out over the sea, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground in the midst of the sea. An impossible miracle, right? How many of those has God done for us? Now think about it. Okay? And behold, I am about to harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them, and I will get honor for myself upon Pharaoh and over all his army, over all the chariots, and over all his horses. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I will be glorified through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So what happened? Angel of the Lord moved around between the two of them, and it was light to the children of Israel on one side, darkness to the Egyptians on the other side. So then there was a strong east wind that came in. Now, consider this. Since they were in the marching column on the west shore of the Red Sea, it was not like a long column, as you see in the movie Ten Commandments, that they would cross over to the Red Sea, because that would take hours and hours and hours. Okay? So the crossing of the Red Sea had to be quick. And so that's why they were in this position in their marching column, though they camped right there. Okay? So the wind came, God split the sea. wide, wide, probably like 2 or 3 miles long. So this was a phenomenal thing. And God wanted them to remember. See? Verse 21, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind all the night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Now, here they go. It was in the morning watch. See? They got across. So it was probably right at sunrise, when the sun was beginning to come up, they all marched across the Red Sea, that whole column. Probably didn't take any more than about 45 minutes to an hour, because everything got across. Verse 23, and the Egyptians pursued them and went after them in the middle of the sea. Now think about this. This is another lesson. Sometimes difficulties pursue us. Sometimes sin pursues us. But God is able to help us. God is able to intervene. And that's where fasting along with prayer comes in, and beseeching God that he will intervene and help. Okay? And went in after them in the middle of the sea, and all of Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, it came to pass that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and the army of the Egyptians were thrown into confusion. Now that's the best way to do it, right? Throw them into confusion. Question, think about this. What did God do at the Tower of Babel? He confused the languages, right? He changed their languages so they couldn't communicate to one another. God didn't have to do a single other thing. They just all quit and gave up. And so God led them to the places that they had to be for their inheritance, which he had set aside for them. So likewise here, throw them into confusion. And he loosed the chariot wheels. Now to make sure that no one escaped, all the wheels of all the chariots fell off. Now that's quite a miracle, isn't it? And made them go heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. That's the thing. Yes, we have battles to fight ourselves, but God is the one who fights for us. And especially in the difficult things. And sometimes the blessing of what God does doesn't appear for quite a while after that. But here it was very immediate. Okay? Verse 26. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So he raised his rod in his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength. Can you imagine the noise of the water coming right there at that spot? Tore up and destroyed all the chariots. All the chariots had their wheels removed. And the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians tried to flee from it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the middle of the sea. The waters came back and everything. Well, the Israelites were wonderful. They were happy. They were joyful. Miriam and the women sang songs of praise and victory, and everyone was just on a tremendous high. Okay. Now then, here's another lesson. Memory is short, because 3 days later, they were at Marah, and the waters were bitter. And they didn't know what to do. Okay? So what did they do? Chapter 15 and verse 24. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. And there he made a decree and a law for them, and there he proved them. Now, interesting. A lot of these things are to prove us, to test us. Do we really believe God? Do we really trust God? What is it that we do? How is it that we do it? That's why we have to come to God in prayer every day and study every day, so that we can stay close to God and His Word. So when these difficulties come, we will believe God and trust in Him. Okay? Now notice what this covenant was, and it shows how our behavior has to be. Verse 26, and he said, if, now I like to circle all the ifs as I go along, okay? If you will diligently hearken. Now hearken means listen to obey. To the voice of the Lord your God. Okay, look at those conditions. If you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, number one, and will do that which is right in His sight, number two, and will give ear to His commandments, again, number three, and keep all His laws, number four, I will put none of these diseases upon you which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Now that's still true today. So you take those four things. Diligently hearken to the voice of God, and remember the three words, obey my voice. Number two, we'll do that which is right in His sight. Number three, we'll give ear to His commandments. And number four, keep all of His laws. Then, here's the promise. See? Notice, if, back here in 26. Now, here's another lesson. All of the ifs are conditional upon us, because God is perfect and He doesn't need conditions. Okay? So think about that. Think of the big if in your life. And we could carry this if forward into all of these. If you will diligently hearken, if you will do that which is right in His sight, if you will give ear to His commandments, and if you will keep all His laws, which I will put none of these diseases upon you, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. I am the Lord who heals you. Now, there are times when we need help, and a proper use of physicians is true. But we need to be trusting in God in these things, because that's important for us to do all the time. And remember, the conditions are there upon us. All right? Now then, let's see the other things we are to do. Okay? We are to fight. And let God fight for us. All right? Let's come here to Psalm 35. God will fight for us. We trust in him to take up the battle. We trust in him to come against those foes that we can't do anything about. We need God's help. We need his intervention. We need his angels to help us, to show us. Here, Psalm 35, okay? And verse 1. Now here is what children of Israel should have done when they first saw the Egyptians, okay? This is what we need to do when we're confronted with problems and difficulties that only God can solve. Verse 1, contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for my help. Okay? Spiritual action that can only come from God and from his angels to intervene and help us. And God will. Also draw out the spear and the lance against those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Interesting. Only God can save us from those situations, right? There was no way that they could be saved by themselves without any arms when they didn't have the spears, didn't have the arrows, didn't have the lances, didn't have the chariots. None of that, just the people carrying their goods out of Egypt. And the Egyptians came, and here's a perfect definition of how God intervenes. Okay? Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be ashamed and brought to confusion. There that word again, confusion. Didn't we see that back there in Exodus 14? Those who seek after my soul, let them be turned back and humiliated. Those who devise evil against me. Now also some of this can be attributed to how Christ was treated when he was here in the flesh on the earth. Let them be as chaff before the wind, and let the angel of the Lord drive them away. Isn't that something? God can do that. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord pursue them. Sounds almost like a repeat of Exodus there, doesn't it? Yes, indeed. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord pursue them. For without cause they have hidden their net for me. Without cause they have dug a pit for my soul. Let destruction come upon him in a time he does not know. Now, doesn't that describe perfectly what happened at the Red Sea? And you can look at some other things that God has done in the same way. Okay? In a time he will not know. And let his net which he has concealed catch him. Let him fall into destruction. Okay? Now, when you're trusting God that way, asking God to fight the battle for you, asking God to intervene for you, crying out to him in tears and pleas and praise and glory to him for all that he can do, God is right there. Okay? And my soul shall be joyful in the Lord, and it shall rejoice in his salvation. All my bones shall say. Isn't that interesting? Your bones speak, but not in a way that we would understand. In other words, there's not the bitterness and shrivelness of hatred that causes rottenness of the bones. Okay? This is joy and righteousness and salvation, which then adds to the whole body. And he reflects it in all my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you? Who delivers the poor from him stronger than he? Yea, even the poor and the needy from him that plunders him. Okay? Quite a thing. God will fight our battles for us, and this is really a tremendous thing for us. Let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back.